Wolfenstein 3D is known as the grandfather of first-person shooters for its role in popularizing a genre that had largely been experimental up to that point. Flight simulators and vehicle combat games had used that perspective, but usually with vector graphics, and they had gameplay that was slow and somehow both very simple and yet overtly complex at the same time. But a year before BJ Blazkowicz made his way onto shelves with confusing box art, id Software had been working on a project as part of their Gamer's Edge contract with Softdisk. Id was required to release one game every 2 months as part of a subscription service that Softdisk provided. Hovertank was the April 1991 release, and while there are some impressive graphical and gameplay advances, the game itself feels rushed and slapped together. Hovertank, also known as Hovertank 3D or Hovertank 1, has the player navigate through a maze within a time limit and rescue all the people, then escape through a portal. The game seems indifferent to how many you save, and it only checks to see if there's any left before granting you the portal to the end of the level. You do miss out on those all-important points, but they don't seem to serve any purpose beyond a high score. In fact, you can still move on to the next level if you've saved nobody. For controls, you have forward, back, turn left, turn right, which are mapped to the arrow keys. There's no strafe function. Control is the shoot button that fires a fireball thing. You can charge the shot to penetrate through targets by holding down Control. There's also a booster button mapped to Alt that is helpful for racing against the clock, but does not help your alarmingly slow turn speed. There are 3 monster types who get in your way that you have to defeat. A mass of tentacles coming out of a UFO that attacks at close range, a red demon guy that punches your tank, and hover tanks that shoot back at you. 3 hits and you die. There's also a timer that counts down until you lose the level. There's also a blue and red item of some kind that heals your character. All 5 things, 3 monsters, healing items, and hostages, are marked on your radar with a different color, which helps you find what you're looking for within the time limit. Let's start with what works here. For a 1991 game, it actually controls pretty smoothly. The game seems to handle the 3-dimensional movement well, and the radar communicates where enemies are effectively. No game predating it comes even close to handling this well. Wall colors are slightly different depending on which axis they're on, so rather than a green wall meeting a green wall and killing the illusion of depth, the difference helps convey the game's sense of perspective. The animations are also smooth and convincing. Well, most of them. It's not hard to believe that this game had the same aesthetic origin point as Commander Keen. Now, what doesn't work? The sound effects are bad. Inexcusably bad. But because it's completely phoned in like the rest of the game, there's an odd charm to it. Every time you bump into a wall, there's a cartoonish bump sound. The explosions were clearly made by a person making explosion sounds with their mouth. The peculiar thing about the sounds is I don't remember voiceovers being very common in gaming at that time, yet all the audio is bit-crushed voices. As a side note, the death screams of the victims are way louder than most of the other sound effects, and act as a pretty powerful incentive to save as many hostages as you can. The 20-second countdown sound is also pretty scary, though also obnoxiously loud. The game's tone and pacing is all over the place. Some levels you'll have no trouble completing in a couple of minutes, yet the timer has a huge amount on it. Others are maze-like, with doorways hidden in corners you'll have difficulty seeing unless you enter the room fully. Many of these levels have way too little time on the clock, and you'll struggle to shave off precious seconds to get to the end in time. The gameplay itself has serious flaws. There are no invincibility frames, so you can take multiple shots in quick succession. Enemies can shoot through other enemies. The turning speed is horrible, so if an enemy comes up behind you, you'll be dead before you can confront them. The lack of a strafe function adds a huge difficulty curve to the game, especially when facing other hover tanks. So you'll find yourself cautiously peeking around corners, especially at the end of levels, because there are no mid-level checkpoints.
Hey Fred,
Oh, hey Bob.
you catch the game last night?
Nah, I watched a movie. Any good? Not really. Ah, that's too bad. You watching tonight's game? Yeah, probably. How about you? Nah, I'm gonna watch the sequel tonight. Finally, there's no real variation to the gameplay. There's only 3 enemies, and you only have a single weapon. While that might be excusable, as all enemies die in a single shot, it means that after you've encountered all 3 enemies, you've seen everything this game has to offer. While the graphics are nice for the time and easy to understand, the visuals are marred by the fact that your hover tank is always bobbing up and down. I know they're trying to use this as a visual indication that your tank is hovering, despite the fact that real hovercraft don't behave in this way. It makes it feel more like your tank is bobbing on the ocean. Arr, hoist the sails! We're casting off for a better game. While I do appreciate the effort to integrate a storyline, the story is utterly meaningless within the larger context of the game. There are some attempts to tie them together, but the nods are token at best. Like, on one level, you have to rescue a scientist and his daughter. As would have been implied from the briefing, there are only 2 hostages on the level, 1 male, 1 female. On another, you have to rescue deserters. One of them is isolated from the rest of the group, and the others are together in a larger area. Sort of like a scout, and the rest of them are in a cohesive unit. It's a nice touch, but these are exceptions to the rule. Usually, you have to rescue a bunch of whoever's before the facility blows up. Perhaps this is best explained with an example. On level 18, you are told that a group called the Dadaists are going to blow up a museum as a form of anti-expression. First off, Dadaists might simultaneously be the weirdest and the coolest villain organization ever created. When we get to the actual level, however, the enemies are those red demon guys instead of avant-garde artistic minimalists. Disappointing. Also, there's a group of 14 people that we have to rescue to exit the mission. The level layout is somewhat reminiscent of a museum if you squint your eyes, and there's even colored panels on the walls, probably to represent art. It's a clever design choice to make up for the fact that there are no textures. Unfortunately, level 18 is as good as design ever gets. And in this game, bad design is far more common than good. I am utterly convinced that level 16 is flat out broken. In level 16, they throw more enemies at you than ever before and a lot of ranged attacking hover tanks. After spending several minutes clearing the level and collecting the hostages, there will be 1 tentacle monster and 2 hostages that you cannot get to. They are placed inside of a wall. Every playthrough I have watched of it had the player struggling to get those last 2 hostages and somehow fluking through it. Sometimes the hostages are killed, sometimes they're able to shoot through the wall, and sometimes they're able to collect them through the wall. Come on, kill the other one. Do it. Were they invincible? Whatever, doesn't matter. Let's get out of here. Whatever the case may be, the game breaks down on this level, and I've never seen someone legitimately complete it in any video of the game. I ended up using the level skip code, which is W and F12. According to Animon on GameFAQs, there are 5 cheat codes in this game, and all of them require you to hold a letter key and hit the F12 key. As I mentioned earlier, W and F12 allows you to skip any of the game's 20 levels. G and F12 gives you invincibility or God mode, and T and F12 gives you an extra minute up to the level's starting time. The last 2 are debugging cheats, one playing a single sound effect, S and F12, and the other displaying memory information, M and F12. Ultimately, Hovertank is only remarkable for its place in gaming history. It is the origin of the 90s first-person shooter. There were previous games in the genre, such as Maze War, Spasm, Way Out, and Battlezone, but all stretched the definition of first-person shooter to its absolute limits. Even Hovertank's role in this regard is a bit of a stretch, as its younger brother, Catacomb 3D, would come out a few months later and render Hovertank more or less irrelevant, which would then, in turn, be rendered irrelevant by Wolfenstein 3D 6 months later. I have never heard of Hovertank until I started researching Catacomb Abyss. The game plays like a tech demo, and in a lot of ways, it really was. It's hardly surprising that it didn't make more of a splash. 1991 saw the release of the Super Nintendo and Sonic the Hedgehog, which launched the console wars. It also saw releases of great PC games such as The Secret of Monkey Island, Wing Commander, Duke Nukem, and Civilization. It was a good year for gaming, and it was the beginning of a furious arms race in features and graphics that is still going on today. Ultimately, I could not recommend this game. Even as a product of its time, it fails to be engaging on virtually any level. The story isn't coherent, the levels have little variation, the sound is atrocious, and the gameplay is inconsistent. The game is a curiosity at best, being the grandfather to the grandfather of first-person shooters. Does this push the game into the so bad it's good category? Well, maybe. Unfortunately, it doesn't have any weirdness or broken gameplay that keeps you engaged and looking for the next utterly bizarre thing. Even the ending is pretty lame, neither so weird it's worth seeing, nor a satisfying conclusion in itself. It's just some text under a still image of your character and the tank, capped off by a lousy joke. The only vaguely interesting thing that happens in the conclusion is you learn the name of your character. Mr. Sledge. Woo. If you liked the video, go ahead and hit the like and subscribe buttons. You know where they are. If you want to see other games I'm doing, go ahead and check them out here. Thanks for watching, everyone, and join us next time here on RetroTour.